So now that we've gone through all of the different tabs in this portion of the Camera Raw interface, what I need to do now is I need to start talking about some of the buttons and clickable items down at the bottom of this interface. First of all, if we want to change our viewing percentage, we can choose some of these preset sections here, or we can hold down the Command or Control key and press our plus or minus keys, which will allow us to zoom in and zoom out. What's going on with these guys down here? The open image, the cancel, and the done. Well, I may have already talked about this, but I just want to reiterate this, that when we're working on our images, doing stuff and everything else, we may or may not want to immediately go into Photoshop. If we do want to immediately go into Photoshop to do stuff in Photoshop that we can't do in Camera Raw, then we click on the open image. Clicking on the open image will take us right into Photoshop. If I hold my cursor over here, it says open as a normal image. Option click to open without updating the metadata. Shift click to open as a smart object. Well, we'll get into smart objects in my advanced class. Now, if you're just working through your images and you have a couple other ones that you want to work with and all that kind of stuff, or you're working on this image and then you realize that you have an appointment to go to, what you'd want to do is click on the done button. When you click the done button, what happens is your XMP file gets updated and saved so that the next time you open up that image, all of those changes are saved in your image, as you saw in the last video when I was working with the snapshots and all that kind of stuff. I clicked done, then I went under the file, opened recent, found it, and everything was maintained. So now, if you're working on your image, you know eventually you want to go and do something in Photoshop with this image, then what you can do is come over here and click on the Save Image button. In the Save Image Options dialog box, you have the choice to save this in the same location or save it in a new location. If you choose that, click on the Select Folder. File naming, you can rename your files if you want to. I personally don't. Once I import my images, I've given them a name. I'm sticking with that name for the life of that image. You can do otherwise. As far as, and now when you see the extension JPEG and format JPEG, the application has to default to something. And again, they're assuming screen display, so that's why you're here. What you might want to do is come over here and choose Photoshop as a Photoshop file. If you're going into Photoshop, why not go in as a Photoshop file? When we do that, all we have an option is to include all the metadata that was in your XMP file that got put in when you imported your images or did any bridge work and all that kind of stuff. I leave that alone. You may want to choose to remove the location info if you have shots of little kids or you and your kids, and when you're posting these images online, you don't want some creep trying to find out where you live. So you might want to remove the location information from the metadata. The other options that you have, I clicked on the extension. You can go lowercase or uppercase. Do yourself a favor, always go with lowercase. If we go into TIFF, then we have some compression options. If you're going with a TIFF, you might want to use the LZW. It's a lossless compression. In other words, you're not going to lose any quality of your image, but you're going to be saving disk space. It's a great option. JPEG, we all know what JPEGs are all about, and you can choose your different quality settings. I personally export everything out as a Photoshop file unless everything I can do has been done in Camera Raw and I'm getting ready to give these to a client. But generally, they're Photoshop files. That's all there is to this. Not a big deal. And if I click Save, then in this location, this image will be saved. That's all there is to that. Now, the thing that I think is kind of important is this hyperlink down at the bottom here. I'm going to click on that, and that is our workflow options. This is kind of important, and it should be dealt with before you click Open Image or Save Your Image. The workflow options, we have the color space, bit depth, size, resolution, and any sharpening. Open in Photoshop as a smart object. I'm not going to deal with that at this point in the game. All right, like I say, in my advanced Photoshop class and course, I'll deal with smart objects in painful detail. Color space. Adobe RGB 1998 is theoretically the color space that you have your camera set to. You either have your camera set to sRGB or Adobe RGB 1998. Choose the Adobe RGB 1998. Color match is an old legacy profile for printing presses from years and years and years ago, and it's still included in here because those systems still are in effect today. As a photographer, you're never going to use it. I can almost guarantee that. Now there's something called ProPhoto. ProPhoto is just as Adobe RGB 1998 is a larger color space than sRGB, ProPhoto is a larger color space than Adobe RGB 1998. But if you don't have a printing device that's capable of working with ProPhoto, then I don't know whether or not it's a valuable consideration for you. The next thing is 8 or 16-bit. Personally, I think I should have 16-bit. If my camera is capable, even though I've done the majority of my editing in here, if my camera is capable of giving me 16 bits, and if I'm printing them on my Epson 3880 printer, which I know is capable of printing a little more than 8 bits of information, then I think I want to have a 16-bit file to press print with. When it comes to the size, we have about 5 or 6 different size options in here. The default size will have neither a minus or a plus sign. If you want to make this smaller for one reason or another, by all means go ahead and do it in here. If you need to make this a much larger file, well, you can try doing it in Camera Raw. Some people say it's better to upsample in Camera Raw because you're working with the raw data. Other people say that they get better results when they upsample from a pixel-based image in Photoshop. It's a debate. What can I say? You know, do you shoot with Nikon or do you shoot with Canon? It's a personal preference. Try them out, see which one works best for you, and then move on. I can't tell you to go one way or another. I can only tell you from my own personal experience that I have had some really, really good success upsampling in Camera Raw as opposed to upsampling in Photoshop. It might be image dependent, it might be camera specific. I haven't gone into that much detail yet. Resolution. This is something that you should set to, let's see, I'm going to try to talk about this in a fashion that makes sense to you. If you never send your stuff out to a photo lab and never press print on an inkjet printer, but only use this stuff for screen display, leave it at 240. Doesn't make a hill of beans difference. If it makes you feel better, set it to 300. Who knows, maybe you're going to print a photo book and you need to have it at 300 pixels per inch. Now, whether or not we actually need 300 pixels per inch is another subject for another day. But if you sometimes send stuff off to a photo lab, but other times not, you might want to set this to 300 just in case. Just in case you're going to be sending something that you didn't think you were going to send it off. At least your images get exported out of the Camera Raw dialog box with the appropriate resolution. Now, if you are pressing print and you're printing to an inkjet printer connected to your computer, and if you're printing to either a Canon or an HP inkjet printer, set your resolution to 300. If you're using one of the higher end Epson inkjet printers, you can go back to either 240, 360, 480, something like that. The Epson inkjet printers will do better work when they're working in increments of 120 pixels per inch. That's why we're going from 240, I said go up to 360 or go up to 480. All depends on the substrate you're printing to will determine the resolution. But whatever that you do, most commonly, set your resolution here so that you're working with that 80-20 principle. 80% of the time I print at 300, set it up to 300, the other 20% you can create a batch process in Photoshop to downsample it to whatever it is that you need it to be done for. Now, we're getting into sharpening, and we can sharpen for screen, and it's just going to give a little bit of a pop for your images. You can sharpen for glossy paper or for matte paper. So let's go with glossy paper for a second, and then you can see you can go a low amount, a normal amount, or a high amount. And again, that is specific to the paper you're printing to and your images and all that kind of stuff. Trial and error, that's all I can say. Personally, I don't use these guys, but I will start to experiment with them in the future. I personally have some sharpening routines that I use that were generated by the good people from Pixel Genius. Those guys are also the ones that actually, I believe, created the algorithms for this stuff in here, so maybe I should give it a try to see whether or not there is a difference. If I can get away with setting it up to print here. No, I'm not going to do it. The only reason why I would want to sharpen at this point is if I'm not going into Photoshop. If I'm going into Photoshop, I'm not sharpening at all. And the majority of my images go into Photoshop. So I'm going to leave that at none. Because I have an action in Photoshop for the different output devices that I normally go to, I can just run the batch process at that point in time. So, just to recap what's going on in here, I would suggest you use Adobe RGB 1998 as your color profile. I would suggest you come out at 16-bit, and then when you're getting ready to press print or put it up on the internet or something like that, then you can downsample. But you want to be in 16-bit if you're going to go and do further image manipulations in Photoshop, for all the reasons I talked about at the beginning of this course. Set your size based on what it is you're going to be doing, and then keep your resolution at whatever it is that you do 80% of the time. After that, all you have to do is click OK, and we're done with all the little dialog box things that are going on down here.